Welcome to this week's Riks Roundup by Riks Europe. My name is Rebecca and I am joined by panelists today, Elias Norgren and Peter Kleppe. Welcome.
Thank you for having us, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So today we will be covering EU courts slams EU recovery fund spending, also holding off on tariff retaliations, and Friedrich Merz. We'll start off with Friedrich Merz. I'm sorry for butchering his name. Why didn't he win the Chancellor election in the Bundestag in the first round, Elias?
Well, he was he was more or less already in name the new Chancellor of Germany as soon as the CDU arised victorious in the last election. But he was somewhat unexpectedly actually denied from the role of Chancellor when the Bundestag actually were voting on filling this office, because he didn't reach the number of votes that were required. The Bundestag requires 316 votes for a chancellor to actually assume the office. He only managed to secure 310 in the first round. And this was due to, I think this is mostly a lot of speculation, because there's no way to know for certain who voted for what and who didn't vote or who abstained from voting. But it's likely that a lot of CDU representatives in the Bundestag actually did this as a form of protest against Friedrich Merz and his policies, which have been, he's been accused of letting down on many of his promises made during the election. He's accused of, basically continuing the status quo of Germany that, most Germans actually voted to get a way out of. Most people voted for a right-wing alternative. They voted either for the CDU on the assumption that the CDU would stand for law and order again, for a strict financial austerity, and so on and so on. And that's not really what Merz has been promising to be delivering in the past few weeks. So that's why a lot of CDU representatives are likely very frustrated with him. Then there's also a lot of demands coming from the SPD, the Social Democrats, who are now supposed to be co-ruling with the CDU in Germany. Now, they believe apparently that the CDU has not made enough concessions to the very left-wing cause that the SPD is trying to drive in German government right now. This is though despite the CDU and the SPD actually having agreed to what I would call a very left-wing program for the next 5 years in Germany. So this was very much a humiliation, both from the right-wing factions of the CDU, I believe, and also from the left-wing factions of the German Bundestag in general, with the SPD actually, who were supposed to be voting on him as the Chancellor, refusing to do so. I guess these agreements were ironed out in the second round, so he actually managed to secure the chancellorship after all. But this was a harsh blow actually against his prestige and his legitimacy as chancellor.
Well, yes, I agree. This was quite an important event. Nobody expected that Merz was gonna fail. And indeed, he did, likely because of discontent in his own ranks, at least. There are some rumors that it's not even excluded that Merz will not survive politically until the end of the term. Next year, we have some German state elections coming up. And if you look at the opinion polls, the right-wing populist AfD is doing very well. They're the biggest party of Germany at the moment, because people are frankly fed up. And as Elias explained, the coalition is just continuing the same policies largely. So if that results in big defeats for the CDU of Merz, I would not exclude that some people from his own party basically push him aside. It's telling that people like Jens Spahn, Carsten Lindemann are not, and these are important CDU politicians, they're not that old, so they still have a career if they sit this one out. So I would not be surprised that these kind of people push Merz aside, if indeed the voters punish his party in the elections, in the state elections next year.
Moving on to our second topic, EU court slams EU recovery fund spending. Peter, what is this about?
Well, so the European Union has its own in-house auditor, the financial supervisor, that's called the European Court of Auditors. And they have been looking at the COVID recovery fund of the European Union. Now, the EU spends a lot of money, 1,000 billion euro over 7 years. But on top of that, in 2021, they agreed a special COVID recovery fund. And the idea was to use this cash to give to member states so they can sort of alleviate the economic pain of the COVID lockdowns. I would say the unwise COVID lockdowns, because if you look at Sweden had the lowest excess death rate of the whole European continent in the COVID years 2020, 21 and 22. So the lockdowns were pointless, but then the politicians said, well, now we need to do something even more pointless, spend a lot of taxpayers' money in order to compensate for our damaging policies. What the Court of Auditors said in its report, which is some kind of a summary of various analysis it has been making over the years, is that it's very difficult to know what happened with that money. It's even more difficult to assess if it was spent wisely. But there's lots of anecdotal evidence that there has been lots of misspending. Last year there was a big mafia seizure in Italy with Lamborghinis being seized, and this was all linked to fraud with COVID recovery money. In my own country, in Belgium, they spent a lot of that money for laptops for schools. They basically overpaid, and this program is also now being wound back. So it's fraud, it's waste, it's just what we know with EU spending. And the worst thing is that this is not just taxpayers' money that's spent and that's it. No. Like you have with the regular EU budget. The way that they raised these funds was not from contributions from EU member states, but by borrowing on the markets. So these are loans that still have to be paid back. So the taxpayer hasn't 100% felt the pain of this. So they will feel that in the future. And on top of that, it's likely that they will take out new loans to pay back for the old loans. So they have to, so that they can avoid having to dig into their current budget, the EU member states. So this very problematic scheme, which was opposed by Sweden and the Netherlands, but it ended up being decided anyway because Angela Merkel, again, she was in favor of it. This is likely going to be a permanent scheme. So very problematic. And the fact that the EU's own auditor says so already, I think should make people think.
Yeah, it's not just already like we were touching on this issue on the last roundup or on the one before that, I believe, and it's sort of this structural or institutional inadequacy of the EU that the others are now reacting to this being a bad idea. When there were so many parties in the European Parliament, there were so many national debates about this, there were so many countries like the Netherlands and Sweden which were vocally opposed to this. They don't want this frivolous spending or borrowing from the European Union, from the European Commission, and yet this is still what they got. And now we're seeing we haven't seen any of the ramifications of this, the long-term ramifications, even though, there's so many scandals that you can point out, as Peter mentioned, for example, how Italy decided to spend their share of this Corona Recovery Fund money. I mean, they had this scheme where they would give tax write-offs to people who were upgrading their housing or upgrading buildings to fit a certain energy standard for the green agenda, essentially, to make sure that that Italy can meet its net zero policies, and also to generally upgrade the housing standard of the country. And now that sounds like a nice goal. That sounds like something that the Italian people would benefit from. But it was just so ripe with fraud that it ended up creating a larger debt hole than it was, supposed to essentially cover up for. So Italy ended up even deeper in debt than before they had gotten their share of this money. And that's just insanely just paradoxical how these types of programs just enable the worst economic practices and the worst political practices of the European Union member states. And it's insane that it took so long for the EU institutions themselves, this time the Court of Auditors, to react properly against this and actually criticize this. This should never have happened. The Corona Recovery Fund should never have been decided on in the first place. It was an undue and unjust movement towards a centralization of the European economy and a political centralization in most respects as well. So this is something that nationalists should be pointing their fingers towards the globalists that enable this to happen and that have essentially indebted them for generations to come. In Sweden, we're talking about 150 billion crowns that future Swedes will have to pay out of their pockets due to the Corona Recovery Fund. That's 15 billion euros. In a lot of other European nation states, member states, the sum might be a little different. I mean, some of the EU member states are also, of course, net beneficiaries from the EU. So countries like Sweden, like the Netherlands, like Germany, like a number of other small countries as well, they're net givers to the EU. And this has just been a way to sort of even out to sort of take from the wealthy and give to the poor, or rather take from the responsible economies of Europe and give to the irresponsible economies of Europe. That's essentially what this translated to, this whole program. And it's a major scandal actually that this was allowed to go through. And it's a shame that the Court of Auditors cannot punish the Commission anymore for having done this. They can only issue this this warning and this denouncement of the program, but it's not going to go further than that.
Staying on the topic of EU, EU holds off on tariff retaliation as it prioritizes defense deal with Trump. Peter, tell us what this is about.
So European countries and the EU have been thinking how to respond to Trump's tariffs. First, they have shelved counter tariffs that they had imposed against American tariffs from the first term of Donald Trump. Then it appeared that they were actually not going to go after American services, but only focus on American goods. And now it looks like they won't do anything at all, at least according to the Financial Times, until the NATO summit in June, because simultaneous to the negotiations on the Trump tariffs, there are negotiations on NATO member states having to increase their defense spending on the request of the United States. Donald Trump thinks that the other NATO members are not paying their fair share, and he wants ideally countries in NATO to increase their defense spending to around 5% of GDP, which is a massive increase, of course. Now it looks like they will end at 4%, spread out over time, over 5 to 10 years, and combined with a decrease of American troops in Europe. But I would say it's quite interesting to see that, look, at the end of the day, if you outsource your defense to the United States, it appears that this then gives America a lot of leverage, including over the tariff discussion. So it will be very interesting to follow.
So that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Peter Kleppe and Elias Norgren.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.